good day to you. It is March the 12th, 2021. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, whenever you happen to be listening to this video. And you are listening to Search for Signs, so pretty cool for you. And I want to thank you if you've listened to more than one video and you're coming back. Now, if this is your first time checking out this channel, let me introduce myself real quick. My name is Gary Willing. And what we talk about here is we talk about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Okay? Now, we've made it to 30 seconds. If you haven't turned off the video by now, you're doing pretty well. But let me just say this. When I first came across this information, like you might be coming across it for the first time yourself, I was completely turned off by this information. I read one of Benjamin Creme's books, Maitreya's Mission, Volume 2. I talked about it in the last video. And at first reading, I did not like it. In fact, my exact thoughts about the author, Mr. Benjamin Creme, was, who does this asshole think that he is? Now, I put the book aside, and I don't know why I came back to it, but I did, and I started reading it, and then I kind of put my toe into the water a little bit, and then I put more of my toes into the water, and I started reading more and more and more. Next thing you know, my foot's in the water and my leg, and next thing you know, I'm pretty much submerged in this, and I read it so much that I blew the cover off the book. And it really did change my life. But I had to get over the initial resistance that I had to this information. And you might be resistant to this information because a lot of times when, especially if you've heard this information before and like some of the questions I'm about to answer in this video, are religious in base. But there's so much more to this information than religion. And you might be a religious person. You might not, right? I don't know. And it might turn you off based on your religion. It might turn you off because you're not religious, right? But there's so much more to this. It's more about the problems of humanity and the solutions thereof. And the biggest problem that humanity is facing is we must create peace. This is coming from Maitreya. And he says, without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future. So if you reverse engineer it, you would have to look at the last part of it, right? Without peace, there could be no future. So our very survival depends on whether we create peace or not. Now, you might look at it and go, I can see why peace is important, in terms of militarily, right? Countries have nuclear weapons. And when those nuclear weapons could go off or it could be fired at another country at any time, it could happen. When it's there, right? Just like a gun in your house. It could go off if you pull the trigger, right? Now, the other part of that is, and why peace is so important, is the environment. And you might not see it like this yet until, hopefully you can see it after I explain it, is the nations of the world have to get together and work toward tackling the environment. They have to do it together. There has to be goodwill amongst nations in order for it to work. And if there is no goodwill or trust amongst the nations, then it's probably little to nothing is going to get done. So that's why peace is so important. Now, I talk about this, and I know you might have listened to these videos before, and he's talking about it again. But it's really important that we look at this. Like the teacher says, without sharing, there could be no justice, right? Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future. So is there any truth to that? Now, I can cite one historical time when it did work, and it's still working, really. But it didn't last very long, and it was only amongst a few nations. But it had to do with the Marshall Plan right after World War II, where the United States gave excesses of what they had to Western Europe to rebuild Western Europe. And it did. But you might not see, and historians certainly haven't really figured this out yet, is that it happened for just a little bit of time where the United States gave the excesses that they had under the Marshall Plan to Western Europe, and then Western Europe gave the excesses back that they started to create back to the United States as payment. That's the principle of sharing. It has nothing to do with communism, it has nothing to do with socialism, if that's a problem for you. But anyway, but that's what the principle of sharing is. That's what Maitreya is talking about doing globally. Now, the reason why I can say with a great deal of certainty will bring about peace, and what the teacher is saying is true, is the United States has a more peaceful, trusting relationship with those nations of Western Europe than they have with any other nations on the planet, and vice versa. if we were to go back historically before the principle of sharing, which is before the end of World War II, Europe was not known for being a peaceful, tranquil continent like it is today. I mean, there are parts of Europe and Eastern Europe that are rough, right? But for the most part, Western Europe is pretty stable, right? It's almost like the United States, like Georgia has never attacked, hasn't attacked South Carolina, I guess there was a civil war back in the 1800s, but you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, the states of the United States aren't attacking one another, right? It's the same kind of thing in Western Europe. And it had to do with the principle of sharing. And so if we did it globally, it would bring about trust. Nations and people of those nations would start to feel that, there's a little bit more justice out there, and it would create a peaceful situation. And then, and only then, will we be able to tackle the environment together. And that's why the teacher says it's so important. So if you're not a religious person, that's okay. Look at the priorities of what Maitreya is saying about how important peace is, and start to do something for yourself in whether it's waking up our world leaders or whatever, about why peace could be important, even for saving the environment. And there are millions of people every year that march for the environment, but they're failing to realize that we have to do it. They know we have to do it together, but they don't realize how we can actually get the whole system to work together. And that's going to start with the principle of sharing. Now, I do want to say this too. The other thing is about this information is, again, not being about religion, is the teacher's not coming back as a religious teacher. Even though he made a promise to every one of the religious groups, he's not coming back as a religious leader. Each one of the people in the religious groups are expecting the teacher to come back in a certain way. They already have it in their mind how it's going to look, and therefore if the teacher doesn't come back in that way, well, then there must be no truth to it. But, if you looked historically, Jesus was the Messiah for the Jews. The Messiah was expected to come a certain way, and Jesus definitely didn't fill that expectation. He fulfilled the promise, of the Messiah coming back, but he didn't come in the way that they were expecting, of course, and they put him to death forthwith, right? But it really is how the teacher always operated. He always comes in the way that people don't expect him to look. And that's why Maitreya can be on TV right now speaking to millions of people and nobody can recognize him. Nobody's expecting the teacher to come back. So how would they even think that he's on TV doing that? They're just listening to what he's having to say and maybe perhaps thinking about it, internalizing it, taking it as, maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, whatever. I don't know. But he is and has been speaking on TV for over a decade to millions of people. You might have seen him and not recognized him. Maybe, maybe not, right? Now, the other thing, too, and this is funny because somebody in a couple of videos ago commented saying, well, if he's been on TV for as long as he has, speaking to millions of people, then Maitreya must be a really dull person. I can assure you that he's not. I've met Maitreya many times. He's anything but dull. But, I do think that, and I'm gonna cite a personal experience I had, okay, where that might actually kind of give you a different perspective on how Maitreya can be on TV and not recognized, okay, is when I didn't know anything about this information, apparently, because I remembered it after I read the information, I had a few experiences with these masters, mainly Maitreya, that were quite extraordinary. Now, at the time, I just thought it was just strange. Well, yeah, that's strange. And I might have mentioned it to a few people. I might not have. I don't know. I can't really remember. But it was just something that, I didn't relate it as any kind of miraculous sign, or anything about the weighted teacher coming back. I didn't think anything of it, right? So to give you an example, back in the early 90s, I was a full-time musician, and I came across this tour where I was able to go and tour with a band out of Philadelphia called the 3 Degrees. And about halfway through the tour in Japan, I don't remember when, I just remember it was in Osaka. I was in the backstage along with the singers, and there were some people that won a chance to go backstage from one of the local radio stations in Osaka. And there was a woman, she wasn't elderly, but she was older, right? And because the group that I was with was from the 70s, so she was obviously familiar with their music for a long time. Anyway, so She asks them for their autograph. And then she turns to me and she kind of, in a Japanese way, bows and hands me the paper and the pencil or the pen or whatever. And I was like, no, I'm just the bass player. She goes, and she insisted on it. She bowed again, smiled, and okay, fine. So I grabbed the paper and I grabbed the pencil and the pen, and I was like, what am I going to say? She doesn't speak any English, and I don't know Japanese. So the only thing that came to mind was to draw out the peace sign, a heart and a happy face, and then I signed my name and I handed it back to her, and of course she bowed and left, right? And then along the way on the tour a little bit, some more people asked me for my autograph. Not very many, but there were a few people that asked me for my autograph and so forth. Yes, I've had people ask me for my autograph before. Yeah, they were just being polite. But anyway, when I got back to Atlanta, I was new to Atlanta at the time, and I got lost. And now it kind of makes me laugh because I've driven through Marietta probably 10,000 times, so I know exactly where everything is. But at the time, I didn't know, and I got lost. And I was supposed to meet the guitar player and give him my passport for the next tour. Now, just so you know, just so you don't think that maybe he was the one that wrote it on there. I never even told him that I signed my name like that. But Harry was about 7 or 8 miles away from where I was. Okay, he was way off of Canton Road, and I was right off of Marietta Square, kind of. So if you know anything about Atlanta, that's how far off he was. So anyway, I needed to let him know I was going to be late, and I also needed further instructions on how to get to where he was. This is before Google. I know you're like, why did you just Google it? Well, I mean, Google wasn't even a thought in anybody's mind at this time, right? In fact, I didn't even have a cell phone, so I had to pull in to a gas station to make a payphone call, right? Now, for those of us under the age of 20, a payphone was something that people used before cell phones to call somebody when they were out away from their home. Okay, so it was typically a very dirty phone. There were a lot of graffiti a lot of times on the phone, and it was one of those things you drop the quarter in and you kind of barely touch the receiver, and you definitely didn't want to put it up next to your mouth because you didn't know it was mouth breathing on this thing right before you got a hold of it, right? So I dropped the quarter in. I take the phone off the receiver. I just started kind of glancing at the graffiti as I was dialing his number, and I look and I was like, wait a minute. It says there was a graffiti in black magic marker to the left, and it said, to Gary. There was a heart sign, a peace sign, and a happy face. It said, still alive and well. And there was a signature, it was a nice signature. It was signed, The Christ. Now, the reason why I'm saying this to you is because at the time, I didn't know anything about Maitreya or these miracle signs or anything like this. And at the time, I looked and I was like, who's Gary? He signs his name just like I did. Huh, that's strange. And I just kind of went on with my day. Didn't think anything of it. So is it possible that Maitreya is speaking to millions of people and nobody's recognizing him? Absolutely. Because nobody's thinking that the teacher's even back. And so even if he's saying some things that could be, kind of like, who's picking up on it? Now, I know there are people who have scoured the internet trying to find Maitreya, and Maitreya said this many times. When you run after me, you've already lost me. So you might have seen him. You might have searched for him and tried to find him and even saw him and missed him because you're thinking he looks a certain way or whatever. I don't know. But there will be a time when, and I'm just posing this for your consideration, so don't think that I'm telling you to believe it, but there will be a time when he will start to galvanize humanity more and more and more and more and more because people will see the importance of what he's saying is true. We need peace. The only way to do that is to share the world's resources. People are going to start to see it as, wow, we need to do this. Not only that, he's anything but dull. I can't remember who wrote that the last time, but he will awaken the hearts of all the vast majority of humanity for change. Now, it's a very quiet, very auspicious beginning to this happening, but it's already starting to happen now. Now, the thing about it too, okay, and let me just say this before I get into the questions, is about his priority about peace. We will be looked at. I'm a firm believer in this. Benjamin Creme never said this. This is just my own belief on this, is that we are the generation of choice, and our grandkids or great-grandkids and beyond will look at us as the generation that made the choice. Maitreya will present a choice to all of us, together, we will either have to accept the principle of sharing to create justice, to create peace, to create a future, or we will perish together. And it won't matter whether you are a Christian, a Muslim, tall, short, man, woman, young, old, atheist, Hindu, doesn't matter, right? You're not American or French or Russian or South African. It won't matter. We will have to make the choice together to either live together or die together. So that will be the choice that he will present to us on the day of declaration for sure. But prior to that, he will start to awaken the hearts more and more and more, inspire us more and more and more. Now, before you get too downhearted, because I know the news always looks bad, right, before it looks good, Maitreya himself said this about this choice. He goes, I already know the choice that you're going to make, and that my heart is glad. So he knows. He said the end's always known from the beginning, too. I neglected to say that. He knows that we will make the right choice. But we have to do something about it. So that's why the teacher's here. That's why he's inspiring us to look to ourselves as one family. So hopefully that helps. Now, the first question, and I always like to encourage questions, even if they're religious in nature, but, if you're, like I said, if you're not religious and you have a question about something, don't feel like it has to be anything religious in nature, okay? And I don't claim to be a biblical scholar. But anyway, I do know a bit about this information and can kind of relate it back to religion too. But anyway, first question comes from Jacqueline Challenger. Hi, Gary. Can you share any stories about Maitreya's horse? I've seen the crop circle of his horse in London. Really? You saw it yourself? That's pretty cool. And was fascinated. Is this particular crop circle real or man-made? I'm truly grateful for any clarity you can shed on that. Much love to you. And much love back to you, Jacqueline, and everybody else. Jacqueline. Now, when it comes to crop patterns, okay, I unfortunately don't have a connection with a master to be able to confirm whether it's real or not. I do know they exist, okay? I do know they're going on. I just, and even on my, Facebook page, I put a lot of crop circles up, or crop patterns and stuff. Some of the images are copyrighted, so I don't want to use them and violate copyright. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that I don't know if they're real or not. I mean, like I said, I know that crop patterns are real, but I don't know if they're real or not, because people can do anything on a computer these days. I mean, I even saw a crop pattern that somebody did that looked like Elvis. You know what I mean? Or an alien's head or something like that, which I know those are easy to pick out that aren't real. But so I tend to just kind of pose it as, what do you think kind of deal. If you think it's real, if you saw it in person, like if you actually went there and saw it, then more than likely it's probably real, right? But if you're just seeing an image of it online, I mean, who knows, Now, I've never heard of Maitreya specifically having a horse as a pet or something like this, but there have been a couple experiences that people have had. One was for a whole group of people, but the other one was for somebody in specifically where he was actually riding a horse. The first one was, I think it was NBC News. I think Brian Williams was doing the commentating on the Arab Spring. Do you remember it during, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but there were millions of Arabs and Muslims marching for justice in the Middle East, right? In Egypt and other nations. And it was, like I said, it was called the Arab Spring. And there was a lot of news coverage on it. And Brian Williams I remember he was talking about it, and there was a video, there was actually live footage of the marches, right? And the protests. And over the top of the marches was a person riding a horse, and it looked like a flame almost as a person, kind of thing. And it just kind of went through the crowd and disappeared. Now, according to Benjamin Creme's master, Maitreya, and several of the other masters were present during most of those marches. But this was one of the many signs of Maitreya being there. And, side note, I have a friend whose son is works in the movie industry under the CGI, and he was convinced it was just CGI. Somebody put it in there, but it was actually put there by the thought of Maitreya. But anyway, the other instance was right before the first Gulf War, okay? And Benjamin Creme talks about it in Maitreya's Mission, Volume 2, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell at the time, he then became the Secretary of State, was having doubts about the United States going and attacking Iraq. And he was one of those people in the Bush administration. He's kind of showing his true colors now as somebody who's more of a peaceful person than a war hawk, like some of the other right-wing militarists, and politicians. And anyway, so he was having doubts, according to what Benjamin Creme said. And Maitreya appeared to his grandson as a white-robed figure on a white horse, and asked his grandson to tell him to either not attack Iraq or the guns are in the wrong place or something. I can't remember, something like that. And Maitreya tried to solve the issue on both sides, from Saddam Hussein. I think he told Saddam Hussein that his guns are in the wrong place and to pull it out of Kuwait, I think is what he said. But he asked Colin Powell's grandson to tell him, that it was wrong to attack, or the people of Iraq were innocent, and they would be made to suffer by his, by the United States attacking Iraq or something like that. And it apparently rocked Colin Powell to his core. And he questioned his grandson many times about what he saw, and did he really see it, or was he just making it up? And his grandson said, no, he was right outside the back, in the backyard, right by the window there. And he came up to the window and told his grandson this. And I think Benjamin Creme's master said that Colin Powell actually went to the then President Bush and asked him not to attack. Maybe it was wrong to do it. And of course, Bush didn't listen, and yada, yada, yada. But so those are only two stories I've ever heard of Maitreya and a horse. Now, I'm just going to nip this one in the bud. I know there's going to be some fundamental Christian, if they're listening to this long enough through the video, which they probably don't, so I'm safe to say this. Oh, no. There's in the Bible, about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and behold a pale horse. But that's, that's nonsense. But anyway, that's the only horse that I know with Maitreya, those two experiences. Maybe there are others. So anyway, now the next question comes from David O. And David, I want to say this. I actually was thinking about you the other day and hoping that you were well too. And you said, hope all is well. Yeah, I'm fair to middling, as they say. Anyway, around minute 4, you mentioned humanity being one. Back in Babylon, humanity took on this philosophy of oneness, and as a result angered God, so he would scatter humans about and confound their languages. Now, wouldn't it infuriate God once again for humanity to act with solidarity in the present day, just as they did historically? I've also observed many, many Christians claiming the Antichrist will come promoting one single humanity. Help. Quick other questions. Or question. Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, Hindus, and other religions, I was taught that all non-Christians, even the lukewarm Christians, will be condemned to the lake of fire after the second death. Any thoughts? All right, where to begin? Now, this definitely falls into the category of one of those religious questions. And I don't mind it, David. I'm not, I'm saying, but me, I always like to joke around a little bit to kind of break the ice or kind of lighten the mood a little bit. All right, where to begin? First of all, I'll start with this. You said, I've also observed many, many Christians claiming the Antichrist will come promoting one single humanity. I do think, well, first of all, I know that there's nothing in the Bible that says that, and if there was any truth to that, if you look at Hitler, Hitler wasn't the Antichrist, but he was definitely the face of the franchise. He tried to unite humanity under the Nazi flag, didn't he? But I do think the claim that Christians make about the Antichrist trying to promote peace or oneness, it's their prejudice against New Age thought that lends them to believe that. Okay, so anytime somebody thinks somebody or something is the Antichrist, it's typically something they're afraid of, there's something they're uncertain about, something they're against politically or so forth. It's never something that's along the lines of what they believe. Everybody's always right, right? Now, the thing about Maitreya, and the reason why people always think that Maitreya is the Antichrist, is because Benjamin Creme said that Maitreya says that peace is possible through sharing. We have to do it, right? It was never Maitreya promising peace. If you follow him or believe in him, then we'll... Never, ever, ever has he ever said that. Benjamin Creme never said that, and Maitreya never said that through Benjamin Creme. It was always the problems of the world are man-made. The problems of the world are real but solvable. Man must just act and implement their will. That's all he said. We can do it if we just so choose to do it, right? So, but yet they take it and twist it and spin it. Well, John said that it never says anything like that in the Bible. What we're faced with today, and this kind of leads me to the whole thing about Babylon, right? Ancient Babylon in the Bible, in the Old Testament, Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel, so to speak, were all symbols for the time during the Atlantis when the masters were out teaching humanity directly, like they will be in the very near future, okay? Now, there was a time toward the end of that civilization, right before it was destroyed, where humanity was used equally by the forces of darkness and the forces of light, okay? And they say that history doesn't rhyme. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it definitely can rhyme. Well, I think it repeated itself at this time. But if you look at World War I and World War II, that was a resurfacing of that ancient battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. The Axis powers were used by the forces of darkness. The Allied powers, although they weren't perfect, especially Stalin wasn't perfect, but he was being helped and aided by the masters of wisdom, the forces of light, to help counteract the work and activity of the forces of darkness through the Axis powers. Okay? Now, the belief, and this kind of all ties in together with what you're talking about here, because the belief that we will go to hell if we don't believe what the churches are putting out there, right? And the whole belief of hell and heaven and so forth, those are all kind of centuries after Jesus taught the people. That's when those beliefs started to kind of come in. And that's all, a lot of it had to do with the energies of Pisces, and which is part of the problems that we're having to deal with as we're moving out of that energy into a newer energy of Aquarius and so forth. But one of the masters said that the greatest triumph, now listen to this, the greatest triumph for the forces of evil was the monopolization of spirituality and religion. So when the early church fathers or founders and fathers and so forth of the early, the Catholic Church devised the plan that God, they have to, God is theirs, right? And you have to, in order to get to God, you have to go through them and give them your money and give them your devotion and so forth. Not so much to God, but to them. That was actually a function of the forces of darkness that caused that. And it worked. Obviously, like you said, it's one of the greatest triumphs for them. It worked amazingly well, even to the point now where science is disproving a lot of that information, right? Even the fact that heaven and hell, I mean, there's no heaven in the clouds and no hell at the center of the earth, right? People still believe it to this day. It's ingrained in the culture and the mentality of billions of people, and so it keeps them afraid, and it keeps them wanting, like even peace, wanting to have peace, because oh my God, the Antichrist is going to come. Oh, that must be. Jesus was coming to teach about peace. Jesus told us, love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the greatest commandment, next to love the Lord thy God, and put no other, gods before him. Right? He was talking about oneness too. He was talking about peace. Feed thy sheep, right? Help the poor, those kind of things. No different than what Maitreya is saying today. But yet, just as they did during Jesus' time, they called Jesus the devil and this, that, and the other, and they put him to death because they were afraid of him. They're trying to do to this information and with Maitreya. They're no different, right? So, but the symbol, like I said, to get back to your question, the symbol for the Tower of Babel and the disbursement of all the people in different languages, that all happened with the destruction of Atlantis. The people that survived, whatever, they had to go to the different continents and live out their lives. And of course, then the languages started to, be different than what they were and so forth. And they started to lose the knowledge that there were even people living, together and all that kind of stuff. So, but I don't think it infuriated God. And I don't think it would infuriate God if we start to see ourselves as one family. I think quite the contrary, right? And, I always say this too. And if you're listening this long, David, hopefully you get a laugh out of this. But if you look at heaven and hell from a logical standpoint, right, there's so much dichotomy that you can poke holes through that theory about heaven and hell. Like for instance, my daughter is a 16-year-old girl, right? She is a teenager. There was a time when she and I were like tight, right? And now she wants nothing to do with me for the most part, right? And the times that we do spend time together, whether it's driving a car or whatever, or I see her passing in the hallway or in the kitchen, I like to haze her, right? I'm not gonna lie. I do pick on her a lot, right? I find it fun. It's like my heaven. Her, I'm sure it's a living hell. And if you remember when you were a teenager, and I remember when I was a teenager, the last thing I wanted to do was hang out with my mother, right? So, or my grandparents or whatever like this, but it was their heaven to see me, right? To me, I was like, ugh, right? So, I can only imagine if I was in heaven with my daughter, right, and I was hazing my daughter because that was my heaven, that would be her hell, right? The other thing too is, let's just say there is a heaven and hell, right, just for theory. And I make it to heaven, right? I know there's a lot of people who disagree with it, but let's just say I can make it to heaven, right? I mean, my God, if Donald Trump can say that Roger Ayers, the former CEO of Fox News, is looking down on us from heaven, then I don't think we have anything to worry about. I think we're all good, right? I think any one of us can waltz right in there, right? The door is wide open for everybody. But anyway, if I made it to heaven, right, and my daughter didn't, right, I could not enjoy the blissful state of being next to my Lord Jesus Christ for all eternity while I know that my daughter is suffering in hell. For me, I can't do it. I would have to go down there and at least try to be with her or help her or some kind of way. You see what I'm saying? There's no truth to it. And I very rarely talk about my paintings, but I actually did a painting about that very topic that, it's entitled, I Would Walk Through the Gates of Hell for You. And it was about the fact that if there was any truth to hell, right, and my daughter was in hell, I would give up life in heaven to go be with her. And I would do that for my wife or anybody else, my mother, my brother, my cousins, my dad, anybody that I care about. I could not live in heaven in that way, knowing that somebody else is suffering in that way. So to me, I don't think there's any truth to it. Now, I do think that people, when they die, they go to one or other levels of the astral plane and they see their families for a time, and then they have to wait for their time to come up, and then they reincarnate again, and they it keeps going and going and going. And then eventually you move out of the astral plane up to the higher mental planes, and then you might not see your relatives in that way. You might just be all light. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying I think that that's kind of the experience of the afterlife that people might attribute to being heaven. And then when it comes to hell, right, I know Ben was talking about the Antichrist. Ben was talking about Hitler. And that Hitler, when he died, he went to one of the lower levels of the astral plane. Even though he was quite advanced as a second-degree initiate, he went to one of the lower levels of what he would say the Catholics' version of purgatory is what he said. And he says that he's in a state of despair and regret for what he did. But his punishment is he won't be able to reincarnate back and start working off his karma for another 2,000 or so years. So that's his punishment for that. But so there is, if you don't live a good life, you might go to one of those levels of purgatory, but it's not for an eternity. It's just for a time until you have to come back and work back your karma and so forth and so forth and so forth and so forth. So anyway, did I answer your question. Yeah, I think I did. So if I didn't answer all of it, David, let me know, or answer it to your satisfaction. No guarantees from management. But anyway, you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.